After 5 weeks of a kinetic regional conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran, global energy markets were in freefall. Supply chains faced severe disruption, and the price of oil was threatening to paralyze the global economy. The pressure culminated in a stark public ultimatum from President Donald Trump. He set a firm 8 p.m. deadline for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, publicly warning that if they refused, the U.S. military would obliterate Iranian infrastructure, stating a whole civilization would die. The threat was backed by immediate hardware. American B-52 bombers were already airborne, flying directly toward Iranian airspace to execute strikes on bridges and power plants the moment the clock ran out. Then, just 90 minutes before the deadline, an intervention occurred. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif rushed to mediate a temporary 14-day truce between the warring parties, a framework quickly dubbed the Islamabad Accord. The bombers were recalled, and a catastrophic regional escalation was narrowly avoided. But the extreme speed required to beat the 8 p.m. buzzer meant the actual geopolitical disputes fueling the war were paused, not resolved. Global financial markets reacted with immediate euphoria. Brent crude oil plummeted 13% in a matter of hours, and airline stocks hit upper circuits as traders priced in a return to normal energy flows. But the political reality on the ground told an entirely different story. Within hours of the announcement, officials in both Washington and Tehran were taking to the press to claim absolute, overwhelming victory over the other. The confusion stemmed from a massive structural flaw in the negotiation. The United States and Iran were not reading from the same document. They were citing two completely different, contradictory texts as the official peace plan. The markets were trading on an illusion. An agreement where both combatants sign off on distinctly different terms guarantees that the moment the ink dries, someone is going to be accused of breaking the rules. This side-by-side comparison shows the core discrepancy. The U.S. 15-point plan demands Iran restore Hormuz oil flow and halt nuclear pursuits. Iran's 10-point framework demands total U.S. withdrawal and war reparations. Critically, their maritime clauses establish completely opposing protocols for strait navigation. By accepting a ceasefire without reconciling these texts, both sides essentially built a legal trapdoor. They gave themselves permission to violently enforce their own version of the peace plan, ensuring the other side would inevitably be in violation. The first major fracture occurred over geography. Authorities in Iran and Pakistan publicly announced that the ceasefire applied to all fronts across the Middle East, specifically naming the ongoing conflict in Lebanon. Israel and the United States flatly rejected that interpretation. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explicitly stated that the pause in fighting did not extend to Hezbollah or the Lebanese border. Acting on their interpretation of the documents, Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness. In a span of just 10 minutes, they executed 100 airstrikes across Beirut and southern Lebanon, targeting military and intelligence infrastructure. The axis of resistance immediately retaliated. Claiming the ceasefire was officially broken, Iranian allied groups launched dense waves of drone and missile strikes, targeting oil infrastructure and power stations in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Because the negotiators failed to firmly define the geographic boundaries of the truce, the direct war between states simply mutated. It immediately escalated into a sprawling regional proxy conflict on the very first day of peace. Meanwhile, Iran leveraged its version of the paperwork to execute a massive campaign of malicious compliance. Technically, they fulfilled the U.S. demand by reopening the Strait of Hormuz to maritime traffic, but then, citing their own 10-point plan's allowance for specific navigation protocols, Iran began charging commercial vessels exorbitant transit tolls, demanding upwards of $2 million per ship just to guarantee safe passage. The global logistics network hit a massive bottleneck. More than 800 freighters sat trapped inside the Persian Gulf, with shipowners refusing to pay the extortionate fees required to leave. Iran successfully replaced a kinetic military blockade with an economic hostage crisis. The ceasefire didn't restore free trade. It gave Tehran a lucrative method of conducting economic warfare. It took less than 24 hours for Wall Street to realize the error. As news of the loopholes in maritime tolls spread, the initial market euphoria completely evaporated. You can see the reality of the situation in the aviation sector. Major carriers like Delta Airlines are actively slashing flight capacity and pulling their growth projections because the cost of jet fuel is surging right back up. Global executives are running the math and reaching a bleak conclusion. Regardless of what the official paperwork says, the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed to standard, affordable free trade. The financial markets made a classic miscalculation. They priced in the relief of a political announcement without bothering to analyze whether the terms of that announcement could actually be enforced. Now, both American and Iranian delegations are traveling to Pakistan for official negotiations, but they are walking into the room operating on entirely different foundational realities regarding what they have already agreed to. While the diplomats prepare their talking points, the reality on the ground continues to be defined by heavy airstrikes in Lebanon and million-dollar ransom demands in the Persian Gulf. A ceasefire constructed out of deeply contradictory documents isn't peace. It is a strategic pause used by both sides to reload and reposition, shifting the 2026 conflict from a direct standoff into a highly volatile phase of proxy violence and economic extortion.